The whole house appeared to be in ruins. The building seemed shaky, the lower levels were flooded, the plaster on the walls was peeling, and there were rust stains all over the place, as though no one had lived there or taken care of it for a long time. Papers, books, and other rubbish were strewn all over the floor. At first, the search warrant for Rick Harrison's home was assumed to be a standard financial inquiry, a routine investigation of the store's operations and potentially dubious transactions. But when the FBI went inside the basement of the estate, everything was different. Nobody could have predicted that there was a sinister secret no one had ever dared to consider hidden behind the hefty door and the freshly sealed layer of bricks. They found a dead corpse when the door was burst open, but that was only the first step. It dawned on the investigators then that they were not merely examining a residence. They were letting them into a true hell, where horrible secrets awaited discovery. Together, let's explore the narrative. The FBI found numerous victims strewn across the basement after breaking through several bricks. Many agents had to hold their breath due to the overpowering stink, but the whole truth emerged when they started the identification procedure. The tale instantly gained international attention, not only due to its horrific content, but also because the main character was a well-known individual who had previously been hailed as an example of tenacity and astute economic sense. What could turn a well-liked television personality become the focus of one of the most significant criminal prosecutions in American history? The solution is not that straightforward. The catastrophe was the result of an underground network and a sinister background that Rick Harrison had skillfully concealed beneath a flawless facade for years. A disparity in the balance sheet, rather than a gunshot or a startling charge, prompted the FBI's initial probe. When the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, and FBI performed a regular audit in early 2022, Rick Harrison's gold and silver pawn shop was identified as a company that could have been involved in tax evasion. The disparities, which mostly included cash transactions and commodities with an uncertain provenance, were slight but regular. Investigators took notice of this. Agents initially thought it was simply another typical case of tax evasion, one of hundreds of cases in Nevada where small and mid-sized firms were taking advantage of legal loopholes. However, Rick Harrison wasn't your typical businessman. He was a national TV sensation with millions of admirers and the face of the American antique business. His business, known for its unusual, uncommon, and highly negotiable things, has been broadcast on television hundreds of times. This further exacerbated his financial record's lack of openness. Something far more serious may be hiding beneath the surface if someone who was praised as a symbol of commercial ethics was engaging in a covert game. After being tasked with closely monitoring the store's financial operations, a special FBI squad in Las Vegas quickly discovered a number of questionable transactions. Many cash payments ranging from $15,000 to $50,000 were made without invoices. Rare objects were bought without proper paperwork, including Egyptian treasures, Chinese pottery from the 13th century, and sculptures of the old Buddha. Some of the items were alarmingly similar to lists of antiques that were stolen from museums in Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. Rick Harrison's case was raised to high-risk level due to one specific aspect. Interpol's internal alarm system kept repeating his name. Prior to being put up for auction in Los Angeles, 3 items that had been discovered in his store were reported stolen in violent robberies in Jordan and Syria. Those things had vanished from war zones only months before they arrived in Las Vegas, according to an internal FBI investigation. Investigators discovered a complicated network of transactions when they started looking through financial records connected to Rick's company. Before eventually making their way back to the U.S. as personal investment accounts, the proceeds from the sale of antiquities had passed through many levels of accounts, the majority of which were registered to shell corporations in Blythe, Cyprus, and the British Virgin Islands. Over $4.7 million was reported to have been returned in less than 2 years. The FBI's viewpoint changed as a result of this development. They now saw this as a potentially extensive money laundering scheme with Rick Harrison at its core, rather than as a standalone financial fraud investigation. Investigators started delving more into the history of valuable customers who frequently came to the gold and silver store. This resulted in a startling revelation. Between 2017 and 2021, at least 5 people who had transacted with Rick on high-value transactions vanished. Notably, none of these incidents had ever been mentioned in any of Rick's official documents, and they are all still unresolved. Rick was placed under covert observation by the FBI due to the overwhelming number of coincidences, even though there was no clear proof at the time that connected him to these terrible murders. For the following 6 months, agents were tasked with keeping a close eye on him, concentrating on his private home, a vast 10,000 square foot house on the western outskirts of Las Vegas that was equipped with a state-of-the-art surveillance system. When the monitoring crew noticed more odd deliveries to the mansion during the night, suspicions increased. Unbranded vehicles carried large unlabeled wooden packages. A few delivery staff members had ambiguous histories and had been the subject of prior investigations for possible involvement in the illegal antiquities trade. At least 3 very restricted sections that were not included in the original designs were also present in the mansion. A detail that only the necessity of hiding something or evading notice could account for. March 17, 2024, saw the issuance of a search warrant. They ransacked Rick Harrison's residence. The investigating team wasn't simply shocked by what they found inside. The United States was rocked by it. Nobody could have predicted that what started out as little financial irregularities would lead to a case of serial killings and a litany of accusations ranging from money laundering and smuggling artifacts to running a worldwide criminal organization. The majority of the discoveries destroyed Rick Harrison's well-constructed public persona. Under the surface, the endearing old entrepreneur was someone else different. On the one hand, he was a well-liked television personality with a contagious grin and vast knowledge. On the other hand, he was at the center of the most horrific criminal case that the American reality television business has ever produced. The focal point of the mystery is Rick's mansion. Located in the wealthy West Las Vegas suburbs, Rick Harrison's mansion was previously referred to by Lifestyle magazine as a history buff's paradise. It looked very normal from the outside. Tall iron gates, a spacious rear pool, a private border with beautiful flora, a garage that can accommodate 4 luxury cars, and more than 2 acres of property. Disguised and enviably private, everything exuded the subtle elegance and sophisticated taste of a TV millionaire. However, underneath that well-maintained facade came what FBI investigators subsequently described as an architect's nightmare. Early on April 17, 2024, the FBI stormed the estate with a search warrant and the assistance of a forensic support team. They anticipated discovering money records, paperwork, and maybe some items that had been smuggled. However, none was psychologically ready for what lay beyond the hefty closed doors. There was an unmistakable feeling of unease in the air as soon as the detectives entered. Even though the inside was opulent, the atmosphere rather than the temperature made it seem cold. There was a peculiar dead air about the home, as though no one had really lived there. It appeared to have been abandoned because several of the rooms were heavily draped and showed no traces of occupation. There were indications that several places had been unusually shut or sealed, as though something was being meticulously concealed. Police found a number of huge wooden crates concealed in the wine cellar, which is only accessible by the property owner, on the ground level. There was no wine in these cartons. Rather, they included unique antiquities, some of which were velvet-wrapped and had the emblems of North African, Asian, and Middle Eastern institutions. Legal paperwork was lacking for the majority of these things. Many of them matched descriptions of items taken during armed robberies that took place between 2016 and 2022. But the true terror started when a spy in Rick's private library unintentionally found a secret area hidden behind a fake wall. The little space was fully enclosed, incredibly silent, and windowless. It contained a tarp-wrapped, decaying body. An ancient watch discovered nearby was eventually identified as belonging to a collector who had vanished in 2019, despite the body's lack of identity. The entire estate was placed under lockdown. After this finding triggered the FBI's special protocol, the search warrant was extended, and forensic teams were sent out in full force. 24 additional bodies were excavated over the course of the following 48 hours. Some were installed in places not specified in the original architectural plans, some buried beneath hollow hardwood flooring, and some concealed in basement storage rooms. This suggested that Rick Harrison had altered structures unlawfully in order to hide bodies. Every body was in a different condition of decay. Some have spent more than 5 years there. The forensic investigation states that men between the ages of 30 and 50 made up the majority of the victims. Some could not be readily recognized because of lacking soft tissue or fingerprints, while others were identified as people who had been reported missing from nearby states. Investigators were concerned about the commonality among several of the victims. All of them had either dealt illegally with Rick in antiquities or had been associated with the gold and silver pawn store. Suspicions regarding the relationship between Rick's illegal actions and the missing individuals were further stoked by this trend. These discoveries only strengthened the connection between Rick's illegal activities and the disappearances. Additionally, hundreds of handwritten notes that detectives believed to be Rick's personal diaries were found at the scene. His feelings, opinions, and intentions toward people he had interacted with in significant transactions were described in depth in these notes. Some of the entries were quite unsettling. He has to be dealt with right away since he is untrustworthy and knows too much. Risky, but well worth the chance. Investigators came to a sobering conclusion as a result of these comments. In addition to being a criminal businessman, Rick Harrison was probably a systematic and cunning serial murderer. The so-called secret gallery, a soundproof area located deep under the basement that is only accessible by biometric lock and is totally cut off from the main electrical system, was another unsettling revelation. Investigators discovered odd items, victim photos, personal items, identification documents, and what seemed to be awards gathered following their disappearances. It was referred to be a twisted monument by others. However, the FBI saw it as indisputable proof of a cyclical psychological pattern, a method by which the murderer maintained control over each victim's memories. Rick Harrison did not exhibit terror when he was taken into custody. One spy described his uncanny composure, his lack of protest or justification. As police closed off the house that had previously represented his success, he just stood there in silence. The idea that Rick's activities were planned and intentional, that he knew precisely what he was doing and had concealed it for years even from close friends and family, was only strengthened by that unnerving serenity. The matter swiftly gained national attention. When the public discovered that a popular television show, and a guy who millions of people trusted, had led a double life for more than 10 years, they were startled. Reporters and cameras crowded outside the mansion as the media flooded Las Vegas, the crime site of one of the most unsettling instances in reality TV history. Was once a beautiful getaway. If this narrative is intriguing and unexpected to you, please leave a remark with the number 1. If not, use the number 0 in your comment. Let's get on with the narrative now. Every door that was unlocked inside the mansion unveiled a new set of surprises. The detectives' realization that Rick Harrison had transformed his house into a cemetery for lethal secrets grew as they probed further. A place where his dominion was founded on blood and quiet as much as money and expertise. The audience was appalled not just by the sum of 25 deaths, but also by the knowledge that Rick had lived amid their bones as though they were non-existent, as though the brutal talks that molded his decades-long career in the perilous realm of antique selling included death itself. And so the question's still there, piercing like a scalpel into the communal psyche. How is it possible for one individual to lead 2 lives? While one guy lives in the limelight of television, the other spends over 10 years in the shadows of premeditated murder going unreported. Investigators understood that what they had found was just the tip of the iceberg, and that the submerged portion may be much deeper and broader than they had ever expected when 3 people came forward to expose the existence of an underground criminal network during the investigation of Rick Harrison's home. The deaths found weren't only the product of an unbridled anger or the rampage of a single lunatic. It was all too methodical, too silent, too flawless. As a result, the FBI came up with a theory that needed confirmation. Rick Harrison did more than commit murder. He played a significant role in a global criminal organization that employed antiques as a cover and cost lives to keep the operation safe. A closed communication infrastructure employing anonymous platforms like AnchorChat and Sky ECC, was discovered through analysis of the electronic data recovered from the estate, including encrypted phones, hard disks and personal servers. Hundreds more texts transmitted straight from Rick's devices were found after the FBI and Europol encrypted the data. These communications included clear information, delivery addresses, item codes, value symbols and cryptic terms of payment like blood formula and black rice gold, which are colloquial expressions used in illicit antiquities transactions. At least 12 of Rick's known acquaintances were found to have criminal histories connected to smuggling artifacts. These people belonged to organized criminal gangs that were active in Egypt, Iraq, Turkey and the Balkans. Interestingly, 2 of them were on Interpol's Red Alert list under the identities Farouk and Sman. These individuals were thought to have overseen the theft of about 300 antiquities from the National Museum of Syria during the civil conflict, according to an internal assessment from 2020. Rick Harrison's key involvement in this network was proved by the fact that he had been in direct communication with them to set up supplies and negotiate rates. The FBI found that Rick did more than merely purchase rare artifacts, which is much more concerning. He had a direct hand in the washing of these goods, determining their legality, and figuring out how to make them lawful before they were sold. Put differently, Rick was more than simply a conduit for money. Being a professional advisor, he was a vital member of the network. The FBI claims that the smuggling operation was based on a triangle concept. The majority of the supply came from unstable areas of Eastern Europe and the Middle East, with distribution facilities located in strategic European locations, including France, Switzerland and Belgium. And the US and China are the main end markets. Rick acted as the entry point into the United States by utilizing his pawn shop for gold and silver to launder money for illicit items. Under the pretense of a genuine collection, he brought these things into the US and then surreptitiously sold them to extremely affluent collectors or at private auctions. Rick Harrison is thought to have authorized at least 147 priceless antiques between 2016 and 2023, with more than $19 million in total transactions. Among these were an almost complete copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, thought to have been stolen from Luxor in 2011, 2 bronze wine containers from the Zhou dynasty in China, an antique lion sculpture from Armenia, and a Buddha statue from the 6th century that was taken from northern India. International law prohibited the commercial circulation of these items. Rick was able to get around the verification mechanisms nevertheless, because of his standing as an authority. Transactions were conducted through middlemen, and the network functioned completely in secret. The commodities were accompanied by fake documents created in workshops in Romania or Hong Kong, and the payments came from offshore firms in the Caribbean. Those who tried to question or oppose Rick Harrison's actions just disappeared. Their remains are now among the 25 discovered in the mansion he constructed with the money he earned from his crimes. One well-known instance included Spanish collector Javier Montes, who met Rick and vanished in Las Vegas in 2020. Rick had given him some items, and Javier had voiced reservations about their dubious provenance according to his wife. He vanished into thin air shortly after. DNA examination of his teeth verified that his bones were among the 25 victims discovered in Rick's house. Valerie Chen, a Canadian freelance writer who had written pieces denouncing the way U.S. pawn shops took advantage of legal gaps to traffic, was implicated in another case. After attempting to interview Rick, Valerie vanished in Nevada 4 months later. The FBI verified that the DNA of one of the female remains discovered in the basement of Rick's mansion matched hers. Such cases presented a bleak picture. In addition to eradicating commercial competitors, Rick was prepared to murder anybody who dared to challenge the system he stood for. "You must bury those who mine gold if you want to keep it," Rick wrote in a journal that was found during the hunt. Rick was not acting alone. The FBI inquiry also found people who knew or at least suspected some of the truth were his collaborators. A number of well-known individuals from the antiques sector were called in, such as a well-known museum consultant from New York and an auction specialist that Cybus had formerly hired. These people were said to have assisted in verifying the provenance of dubious items. The number of suspects kept increasing even though no official charges were brought against them. Rick's status as a television personality contributes to the solution. Not everyone can create the natural media barrier that Rick did. He came out on television as a calm, inquisitive man who was interested about history. In addition to enjoying his captivating tales, viewers had faith in him as a trustworthy specialist who could evaluate and assess rare items. Rick further cemented his reputation in the public eye by hosting several speeches, taking part in exhibitions, and keeping cordial ties with prominent historical groups. Any skepticism was promptly disregarded, since it was unthinkable that someone like Rick, with all of his notoriety and integrity, could be involved in smuggling. Is Rick Harrison a thief? The majority of individuals first believed the reports to be untrue. The nature of the antiquities trade accounted for the remaining portion. The line between what is lawful and what is not is frequently blurred in this society. Very few things have completely traceable beginnings, and legitimacy is sometimes determined more by the reliability of people than by impartial records. In this instance, Rick was both a part of the system and the one who changed its regulations. Rick Harrison's situation became more than just a personal controversy once this network was made public. It ushered in a new era in the fight against cultural smuggling, when criminals wearing suits instead of masks appear on TV stages and grinned as they talked about the importance of history. The American public was horrified not just by the finding of 25 dead, but also by a far bigger, more troubling question when the FBI made the first pieces of evidence public. How many individuals, items, and museums were actually a part of a criminal organization in which Rick Harrison was only the leader? People started to see that what they had assumed was only a man who was enamored with antiques and history was actually the head of a highly developed criminal organization, with horrifying secrets concealed under the TV star's supposedly honest and modest exterior. In addition to undermining public confidence in the reality TV sector, this query cast doubt on the authenticity of the thousands of rare items that are for sale. Did the well-known museums we used to trust serve as authentic cultural archives, or were they merely fronts for illicit activities? The double existence of Rick Harrison on TV. The name Rick Harrison was well known. From Roman coinage to Civil War armaments, he had constructed the reputation of a shrewd, composed businessman who handled issues coolly and with a wealth of knowledge. Rick presented himself as an amiable academic who offered the historical context of the objects he evaluated. He was unique among reality TV stars because of this. People observed him, not just for amusement, but also to get new knowledge. But the public had to wonder how one guy could lead such a drastic double life for more than 10 years after the FBI discovered what was inside Rick's house. As a serial killer on one side, and a moral role model on the other, something much deeper than intelligence or acting prowess was the solution. Rick Harrison's life had been carefully planned to give him control over everything, including how other people saw him. It wasn't only concealment. He purposefully separated himself into many personalities, each of which operated using a precise personal record that was meticulously stored inside his house. The journal entries found in his desk drawer showed a completely different Rick Harrison from the one he presented to the world. He discussed in his works the strain to uphold his public persona, the oppressive sense of false adoration, and in particular, the need of establishing a private place where I am free to behave as I choose without anyone's consent. Everyone has a hidden museum, according to one terrifying entry. At least they don't lie, even though some are filled with memories, some with failures, and mine with corpses. This was a chilly, calculated admission, rather than a confession. Rick was well aware of his identity. He did not deny his inner darkness. Under the limelight of celebrity, he had simply learned to conceal it in a location that no one could guess. Rick Harrison did not meet the description of an impulsive or uncontrolled killer, according to the criminal psychologists who examined the case. Rather, he was a very intellectual individual who had the characteristics of an organized killer, adept in deceit and upholding flawless routines as a front. That's why he was able to live, work, and frequently make television appearances despite only a few meters away from the remains of people who had threatened or resisted the subterranean network he dominated. An preoccupation with total power, both in deed and mind, is a defining characteristic of such murders. Didn't only steal artifacts, He wanted total control over the business, including price, sourcing, and seller reputation. Rick had to be the one to determine what was valuable if it was priceless. This way of thinking has a direct impact on his response to danger. Personal animosity did not lead to the deaths of the victims, but because they interfered with Rick's system's ability to function smoothly, it was a defect, and Rick dealt with defects by silently and indifferently getting rid of them, like a defective component being taken off a production line. Experts found that Rick concealed several personal belongings from the victims over the course of the inquiry. Jewelry such as necklaces, wristwatches, and even old airline tickets, hotel receipts, and family pictures. These things were stored in display cabinets in a hidden area that only Rick could unlock with a fingerprint lock. This was dubbed his criminal memorabilia vault by the FBI. Additionally to Rick writing things down was his actual ledger. The actual ledger is this one. I don't keep track of money. I include those who are not deserving of life. Despite being strange, Rick's collecting fixation exposed a darker side of himself. He killed to preserve memories, not merely to hide his misdeeds or remove barriers. In his underground realm, Rick prized the lives he had stolen as mementos, much like he would a rare Roman coin or an 18th century gun. This was his manner of commemorating his terrible victories, not a means to appreciate accomplishments. Rick gathered the extinguished lives of his victims as trophies this time. There was no personal tragedy or trauma experienced as a youngster that caused the gap between TV Rick and Dark Rick. The FBI obtained psychiatric assessments, which stated that Rick had no history of mental illness, had a normal childhood, and had not been molested. But he'd shown evidence of a fixation with supremacy since he was a toddler. He loved to win, to prove others wrong, and he particularly detested being questioned. He was quiet and inconspicuous in social situations, yet he always wanted to be the only one with the answers, according to his high school professors. Rick was not shocked by his fame. Over his 10 years on Pawn Stars, it had evolved into a tool. Rick never made any serious errors. He avoided tabloid media, managed the material, and only made an appearance when everything was ready. This demonstrated his profound awareness of the power of perception, and his use of it as a defense against uncertainty. When the truth was out, the public was startled by his skill in managing his image. Rick wasn't an unstable person or a loner. He was the epitome of consistency. And the cornerstone of societal security was rocked when people understood that even a symbol of trust might be a heartless murderer. Americans in the middle class who supported hard work and the idea of creating money out of nothing made up the majority of Rick's audience. Rick was a live example of that goal, which is why they respected him. In addition to hurting them, this case made them feel deceived since in addition to killing people, Rick ruined their faith in the media and the idea of success. Rick was not the only person affected by this division and dualism. Additionally, it mirrored the essence of reality TV, which is a universe in which anything can be constructed, refined, and altered to seem more authentic than it actually is. Rick was aware of this and used it to construct an idealized self-image that even he started to believe in. However, the FBI found that the individual in his house was actually Rick, the assessor of human lives, and the price he set for them as proof, not the appraiser of artifacts. The discovery of 25 deaths in his estate, occasionally used as a metaphor for the lethal consequences of public outcry and media influence. The United States was rocked when the FBI formally announced that 25 dead had been found at Rick Harrison's house. The public was appalled, not just by the sheer number of victims or the graphic nature of the murders, but also by the case's name, which made it impossible for anybody to believe it. One of the most crafty serial murderers in reality TV history was exposed as a well-known figure who has been a regular TV personality for more than 10 years. At first, the public's attention was drawn to Rick's family, especially his longtime Pawn Stars co-star and biological son, Corey Big Hose Harrison. In addition to being Rick's biological heir, Corey was the direct heir to his television legacy. Following the abrupt accusations that his father was a serial murderer, the head of a global network for smuggling artifacts, and a man living two lives in the family home, Corey found himself in the public eye and the subject of a personal investigation. Answers were promptly sought by the media. Was Corey aware of Pawn Stars? In a sitcom that ran for more than 10 years and had more than 500 episodes, Corey was shown as a happy, occasionally innocent individual who always supported his father through significant transactions. It was difficult for many to accept that Corey had not observed anything out of the ordinary about his colleague's father. The public was divided into two groups: those who sympathized with Corey and saw him as a victim, and those who criticized him for perhaps knowing but keeping quiet for his own benefit. Corey said to the cameras, "I didn't know," during his one and only public appearance following the event. "I wouldn't be here today if I had known. I am not his accomplice, I am his son." However, his remarks didn't really stop the mistrust from rising. Some online users looked up previous interviews, examined program snippets, and looked for hints in Rick's actions that Corey could have observed. Nobody knew for sure, but it was obvious that doubt had now damaged Corey's reputation as a faithful successor. The fact that they had spent more than 10 years documenting and engaging with a killer without anybody suspecting anything was just as shocking to the production team as the atrocities. An unnamed production staffer, who spoke to Hollywood Reporter, claimed that Rick had always been in charge of all backstage operations, including scheduling and screenplay editing. Although he was never very amiable, he was consistently professional, on time, and composed. In hindsight, the most disturbing aspect was really that tranquility. History Channel was forced to permanently discontinue the program as the issue surfaced. Advertising contracts, foreign distribution rights, and even shop tour contracts were all cancelled within 10 days, even though Pawn Stars was one of the channel's most successful and long-running trademarks. Numerous long-standing crew members, who had been with the program from the beginning, were abruptly laid go. "I believe I had a hand in creating a media monster," one cameraman acknowledged. In actuality, the gold and silver pawn business turned into a trap. Additionally, the Life Store, a popular tourist destination in Las Vegas, was shut down permanently. Tourists stayed away from the structure entirely while it was closed for examination. Individuals who had previously gone to purchase a tiny item of jewelry and maybe see Rick Harrison in person now desired to forget they had ever been there. Rick's family has been destroyed. His wife vanished from the public eye and was thought to have fled Nevada, but she did periodically show up in behind-the-scenes video. The youngsters said nothing at all. Some sources claim that they were assisting investigators in determining whether family assets were acquired illegally, which is a prerequisite for avoiding criminal culpability. Rick Harrison was formally charged in late March 2025 with 29 charges, including money laundering, smuggling artifacts, operating an organized crime organization, first-degree murder, and impeding law enforcement. After over 3 months of investigation involving more than 70 federal officers and criminal specialists, the prosecution procedure was accelerated. By this time it was clear that Rick Harrison was the main player in a string of planned killings that took place in his own home, where the FBI found 25 bodies that had been meticulously concealed, transforming the property into a chilly museum of death. Under tight security and close international media coverage, the first trial began on September 18, 2024, at the federal court in Nevada. The media referred to this as reality TV's trial of the century. Over 200 reporters were permitted to cover the case in real time from outside the courthouse. Every day CNN, NBC, and CBS offered coverage and commentary that broke down every aspect of the events. The quantity of claims and strong evidence against a reality TV star in the United States was unprecedented. Maria Lopez, the lead prosecutor for Nevada, made a startling opening statement. Rick Harrison, the defendant, is more than simply a killer. He has established a criminal enterprise. The blood and bones of victims are used to lay every brick in his home. 3 major pillars supported the prosecution's case: tangible evidence from the scene of the crime, the remains of the victims, notebooks, and personal belongings, computer data, including encrypted messages, covert recordings, internal monitoring, and witness accounts from those who had threatened Rick or traded artifacts with him. The courtroom fell silent in awe when a startling information was disclosed. Rick Harrison was captured on camera standing in front of one of his trophy display cases in his mansion's library. He touches a jewelry in the video that was subsequently found to be victim Valerie Chen's. Rick doesn't say anything in the video, but the jurors shuddered at the way he gazed at the object with a cool, emotionless look. The silence in his deeds served as a terrifying reminder that Rick's brutality was a well-planned and deliberate aspect of his deeply rooted personality, rather than an impulsive reaction. That look was not only an assessment of anything, rather it was an obvious demonstration of the authority and control he was always trying to preserve. The defense, headed by renowned lawyer Peter O'Donnell, employed two tactics. They denied the murder allegations and questioned whether the inquiry was lawful. They contended that Rick Harrison was the victim of a plot to destroy his fortune and reputation, and that the majority of the evidence may have been false. O'Donnell criticized how the public and media had found Rick guilty before he had an opportunity to defend himself, calling the case a media trial on many occasions. Nevertheless, the overwhelming body of evidence that was accumulating against him could not be disregarded by these reasoning. The defense shifted its strategy, speculating that Rick may have had unresolved psychological trauma or dissociative personality disorder. They contended that an unstable mental state may have been the cause of his behavior. However, this assertion was categorically denied by FBI psychological testing and medical data. Rick has no history of mental illness and was judged to be completely conscious of his conduct. He was found to be mentally capable of facing trial and completely capable of comprehending and accepting responsibility for his actions by psychological specialists. When Rick Harrison was permitted to represent himself in court, the trial reached its peak, an unexpected choice. He spoke in a flat voice and denied any charges of murder for almost 40 minutes while maintaining eye contact. "I am a businessman, perfect in antiques," he said. "I'm not a killer. All of your statements regarding me, the mansion and the bodies are either made up or part of a plot." But the jurors was only made more hostile by his denial. Despite the substantial evidence found during witness testimony at the house, his complete lack of remorse and detachment from the reality of his actions only served to tighten the legal noose around him. According to testimony from a former employee, Rick threatened him because he knew too much about the company's secrets and Rick's unethical behavior. In order to facilitate illicit transactions, an auction specialist acknowledged receiving payment to fabricate the provenance of the antiques Rick had sold. After looking into Rick, Valerie Chen also voiced fears about her safety, according to a journalist who had collaborated with her. She even expressed her concern about the possible outcomes of disclosing these secrets. Rick was suspected of being involved when Valerie vanished a few weeks later. In addition to offering important information, these testimony exposed Rick's risky interaction with others around him. After more than 80 court sessions and over 7 weeks of litigation, the 12-member jury unanimously returned the verdict. In addition to being charged with trafficking, money laundering, and operating a multinational crime syndicate, Rick Harrison was found guilty of first-degree murder for each of the 25 verified victims. The penalty was life in jail without the possibility of release. In addition, the court ordered that Rick's house, gold and silver pawn store, foreign bank accounts, and multi-million-dollar artifact collection be seized. Rick didn't turn around as he was led out the courtroom. Instead of walking like someone who had been deceived, he walked as though he had totally revealed his secrets and was resigned to his fate. He vanished beyond the steel doors with a face devoid of feeling, taking with him a past that America would never forget yet wished to forget. Once a national TV star, Rick Harrison turned into a serial killer, multiple offender, and the brains behind a global network of antiquities trafficking. In addition to bringing about his own demise, he also left a negative legacy for reality TV, and more generally, for how the public views trust and truth. The trial is over, the verdict is in, but the rifts in American society caused by Rick Harrison's case are still visible in journalism classes, media conferences, and intellectual forums. Today, the name Rick Harrison serves as a textbook illustration of the duality of public perception, and a stark reminder of how both the general public and the reality TV business have failed to see below the surface. How do you feel about this case? What aspect of it chilled you? Tell us what you think in the comments section below. I'd be interested in hearing your viewpoint. To ensure you don't miss any more stories, remember to press the notification bell, like and subscribe. Sometimes the truth is scarier than imagined, making it even more terrifying than fiction. See you at the following one.